Chapter 2. This is a bad place. Night. Silence. The immeasurable depth of the sea beneath your feet. The immeasurable depth of heavens above your head. A gust of wind hardly moved the sail. The dark masses of water shifted like a great slithering beast under the boat, rocking it softly, gently. Rest. A moment of respite amid the dormant terror of the sea. An ordinary sailor's night. Melocles was awake. He leaned against the mast, seeing the prow of the boat in front of him, its dark contours rising and falling steadily against the bright burning stars. Above his head, above the square sail, he saw the great swathe of the Milky Way. He stared at the stars with such intensity that tears welled up in his eyes. He shook off the tears, but then they welled up again. Let them flow. There was too much joy. There was so much joy that one had to shed a few tears. To see the sea and the boat and the stars, and to know that one would see them tomorrow too, and the day after tomorrow, and always. To live and to be free. Oh, gods! How terrible it was to die when you were 16, and how wonderful it was to be alive when you were 16. He had been born in Miletus, a large port city in faraway Ionia, which was a swathe of Greek settlement on the western shores of Asia Minor. He spent his childhood there, grew up and studied there right up to the age of 12. He learned various sciences, reading and writing and rhetoric, or rather, one should say, declamation of heroic poems, and gymnastics and swimming, just like all the other Greek boys in Miletus at the time. Miletus was then the leading city among Ionian cities, and the Ionians were the leading tribe among the Greeks. Melocles' father, Lycaon the sailor, a brave sailor and a fisherman, ensured that his eldest son was as well educated as the sons of other, wealthier citizens. At the same time, he taught his boy one more science, above and beyond those learned by all the others. He took him along on his boat, on long journeys, on fishing expeditions, and he taught him the knowledge of the sea. This practical study was the best and quickest way to learn. By the time he turned 12, Melocles was already a proficient sailor. He knew the habits and vagaries of the sea and could read sunrises and sunsets. He knew how to understand the shapes of clouds, the gusts and directions of winds, the sound of the waves and the swelling of tides, how to understand their language and warnings. Then, suddenly, everything changed. When Melocles was 12, his father died. He disappeared in a storm at sea. His ship, the pride and mainstay of his sailing life, perished with him. Then came the difficult times, great sorrow, great poverty. Melocles' uncle, a sailor and a merchant, took the boy with him on a journey to Greater Greece, a string of settlements at the sole of the Italian boot. And then they went farther, to the recently founded settlement of Parthenope, otherwise known as Neapolis. That journey was supposed to take 6 months, but his new guardian, Melocles' uncle, was lured by the good earnings in the Tyrrhenian Sea, and decided to settle in the new colony. They spent the next 3 years there, taking coastal trips, carrying people and goods from Neapolis to Cumae, to Messenia, to Elea or Taranto, reaching twice the shores of Gaul in adventurous expeditions far north. This was Melocles' new life and new school. He almost forgot reading and writing, but he learned his sailing like no one else his age. He wanted to go back to his family in Miletus more than once, but his uncle, a stern and ruthless man, enjoyed the boy's free labour and did not let him go. And so Melocles kept putting off the date of his return. And so years passed. On their last trip to the recently founded colony of Massalia on the shores of southern France, in the middle of the night their boat was attacked by pirates. His uncle died in the ensuing battle. Melocles saw him die. He himself fought to his last breath. He was knocked down and overpowered. He struggled to free himself, biting his attackers like a young wolf. At last, wounded, he passed out from pain and fell into enemy hands. And then the hellish life of a slave began. In the next few months, he was taken from one human market to another. Floggings, chains, and hunger were to teach him obedience, fear, and blind, dog-like submission to his new masters, the Phoenicians. They intended to teach him obedience, but in this they failed. His haughty soul snarled. His pride raised its horned head after each humiliation. Instead of asking his masters for mercy, he asked Zeus for revenge. Instead of raising his hands in supplication to his masters, he clenched his fists. He tried to escape twice. After the first time, he was beaten unconscious, and it took him a month to recover. The second time, he was sentenced to death, this death from which he had now been saved in the last moment. Such was the story of Melocles. Sunrise found them on high seas. The sky was cloudless but dull and hazy. The wind died down. Its faint gusts now barely flapped the sail, and the boat moved so slowly that Callias began to doubt whether they could reach the shores of Sicily before nightfall. There was nothing for it, he thought, and, tired after a sleepless night, he woke Melocles, then cursed the steersman roundly for dozing at the helm, and, making himself a bed among the sacks of cargo, went to sleep. The boat ploughed on. It was a typical Greek sailboat of those days. Its prow was slightly raised, its stern was wide, and it had one mast. A broad, square sail hung from its horizontal beam, tied at the bottom corners with straps of coconut fibre to the sides of the boat. The steersman's broad rudder was at the stern, at least 3 times as wide as a normal oar. A pair of oars were strapped to the sides. Those were used only to manoeuvre the boat once in a harbour. Little boats like this were used for fishing or coastal navigation, rarely for longer expeditions. But Callias was a bold sailor and an enterprising trader. He had hoped to earn well by trading in Carthage, and he did. And then he picked up a paying passenger into the bargain. It was shaping up to be a great trip for him. Gradually the sun rose higher. The sea rocked them gently, lapping their sides with lazy clapping. The helmsman looked at the sleepy sea and sky and decided that this apparent peace did not bode well. A change was certain, and within the day, and in any event, before they reached Syracuse. Melocles was not frightened by the helmsman's predictions. He had become familiar with the sea like few others. During his short life, he had experienced many storms at sea, and he knew that for a good sailor in a strong boat, the high seas, far from treacherous reefs and shallows, were perhaps safer than land. With the sure eyesight of the child of the sea, he had already judged the boat and its master, and he knew the boat should bear the heaviest blows of weather, and the pilot would serve it well. Besides, how could he be afraid of a mere storm? He, who had been beaten for a year, who had prayed for death and looked for it in hopeless attempts to escape. Why, he would have found his death yesterday had it not been for his unexpected deliverance. And now he was not only saved, but he was free. He was getting closer with every passing hour to the land of the Greeks, and with it to his homeland and his mother. The prospect of having to face a storm at sea did not frighten him. Yesterday he had been surrounded by slaves and beastly slave drivers, a fate 100 times worse than any storm, and today His saviours were with him. Their kindness overwhelmed him with reverence and admiration. He was deeply moved, and gratitude brought tears to his eyes. He recognized Callias. The man reminded him of his own father, who had also concealed a noble and devoted heart under a quarrelsome mask. As for the other, the distinguished old man, silent as a statue, his figure filled the boy with reverence and dread. "He's some great dignitary or sage," he whispered to the helmsman. "Or a priest," said the other. A couple of hours passed without any incidents. The wind was lazy, soft, intermittent, as if it too fainted in the day's rising heat. About the second hour of the day, that is, 2 hours after sunrise, they woke Callias. They noticed the outlines of some land on the far right horizon. A strip of sandy hills just barely visible from the boat shone like a golden thread between the blue of the sky and the blue of the sea. Upon seeing it, Callias turned the boat northeast, and the land vanished from sight. "What was that land?" Melocles asked.
"Carthage."
"Carthage? Still?"
"Yes, boy. Why, does your back smart at the mention of the name?"
Then, lifting his finger upward, he said gravely,
"Carthage, you see, sits deep in its bay like a dragon in his lair, or, better yet, like the hungry throat of a viper in its wide-open jaws. These jaws are wide open because, the throat is always hungry. What we saw was one of its jaws, the eastern arm of the bay, jutting far out to sea."
"And that arm belongs to Carthage too?"
"Who knows exactly to whom it belongs? The land is empty. It's just so much sand. But the Phoenicians have built trading posts and watchtowers all along this shore. There are pirates here too, because they come to do business with Carthage. This is not a good place."
"Aren't they afraid of the guards?"
"Oh, the pirates? Why, they and the Carthaginians work together like brothers. You should have learned it on your own hide, no? The pirates soldier to the Phoenicians, yes? Well, they prefer not to go to Carthage openly, although it does sometimes happen too. But here, on these empty sandy banks, they can do their dark business with Carthaginians. Ho! This is not a good place."
This was true. Pirates, whose nests were scattered all over the Mediterranean Sea, often came to Carthage to sell their captives and resupply their ships. Hated by sailors, these men were terrors, not only for travellers but also for smaller coastal towns. Yet they never seemed to pick a fight with Carthage. What's more, by some strange coincidence, their attacks and robberies tended to focus on those who had displeased the great city, especially the Greeks, whose dash, energy, and enterprise often hurt Phoenician trading profits. The Greeks suffered the most as a result of these attacks, and many thought this happened with the tacit understanding of Carthage and of the Great Phoenician Council. Carthaginians were alarmed by the rapid development of Greek colonies in the West. Fearing an open war with them, having neither a martial population like the Greeks nor a large army, they supported pirate gangs by giving them weapons and money to fight the hated Greeks. And thus, at a stroke, they achieved two benefits. They undercut Greek trade, and at the same time, they acquired new slaves. The trade in slaves was one of the main sources of wealth for the Phoenicians. Their leading cities, Carthage in Africa and Tyre in the Levant, were at the time the largest human markets in the known world. Desperate Greeks defended themselves from pirates as well as they could. Battles raged on land and sea, and so it had been for many years throughout the western part of the Mediterranean. No sailor could sail without a shudder by places frequented by pirates. Therefore, it was not surprising that Callias so hastily steered clear of this bad place. and it was not surprising that he became alarmed when he spotted two large ships sailing in front of them. But these sailing ships came from the north, from the side of Sicily, stayed far away, and disappeared quickly over the horizon. Seeing them, Callias nodded his head appreciatively.
Ordinary merchant boats. Wise, understanding sailors. Check out these tricksters. Two boats going together for safety, and rightly so. With even one of those ships, the pirates would have had their hands full. But with two, that's smart. I like it.
Then, pointing to his own boat, he added,
The worst thing is this kind of a barrel. Just big enough to hold trading goods, but too small to fight.
Melicles shook his head. It's a nice boat, Lord. My father had a similar boat. Callias looked at him curiously.
Your father had a boat? Was he a merchant?
No, he was a fisherman, but he had a boat.
He had his own boat?
Callias looked at the boy with a lot more respect now.
And what happened to him?
He died in a storm. I was 12 at the time. Callias nodded.
Ordinary thing with a sailor, he muttered.
Then they started talking about different kinds of boats, barges and galleys, about the difference in shipbuilding here and in distant Miletus. They distinguished between deep sailing ships adapted for grain transport, from the shallower but rounder-bellied barges intended mainly for the transport of horses and cattle. Some of these ships, in addition to the one great mast with a huge square sail, also had a second mast, slightly tilted forward, with a more triangular sail. This was the new Phoenician invention. Most of these big cargo ships, in addition to the sail, also had 20 to 40 rowers below deck, so that their locomotion did not depend entirely on the whim of the wind. Callias talked about the great warships with high sides, sometimes with 2 or even 3 decks, and perhaps 60 rowers per side, in 2 and sometimes 3 rows, one above the other. He had seen such ships in Athens, Syracuse, and in hated Carthage. Melicles had never seen such ships up close, but he described the pirate vessel which had captured him, which was like a hybrid of a trading ship and a warship. It was wider, with only 1 row of rowers, but the prow had an underwater spur, a kind of ram with which to break other boats, and a tall overhead platform from which soldiers could jump down on their prey. Callias was surprised that, despite his young age, the boy knew so much of the sea and could talk about it confidently like an old sailor.
He's one smart barley cake, he said to himself appreciatively.
Hours passed in silence. The heat continued to rise. Towards noon, they spotted 2 sails on the horizon. This time, however, it was one ship, and it came from the south, from the bad side, and it caught up with them very slowly but steadily. There was some commotion on the boat.
"That's the bad side,"
whispered Callias, staring at the faint silhouette of the ship.
"Phoenicians?" "Hades knows. Could be Carthaginians, or could be pirates. I told you, here one meets both."
"Or maybe they are ordinary merchants."
"Maybe. Many merchant boats run through here. Many sailors."
This consoled them somewhat, but the strange ship never strayed out of sight of their boat. An hour later, as the strange ship drew even closer, Callias said with some anxiety in his voice,
"I don't like this. She's coming in too fast. We ride on the wind alone, but they also row. Why are they in such a hurry? Who rows with the wind in the back? A narrow, large galley with sails, just like they build them now in Cyprus and Sidon. An expensive ship. An ordinary sailing ship would not be flying so fast in this ridiculous wind. This is a government ship, a military ship. No merchant would spend that kind of money just to add a little speed to his goods. Look, in this dead wind, we can barely drag ourselves for pity's sake. And they—" Here he fell silent, shaded his eyes with his hand from the glare of the sun, and stared towards the approaching sails. The helmsman stood by his side. They gazed together, silent for a long time. "By Hades and the Erinyes," he cursed again. "Rip out my guts and eat them raw if I ever set out for another trip on this God's blasted nutshell. Righteous Zeus! In 2 hours they will be upon us. Or earlier,
If the wind doesn't change.
or if they are chasing us at all."
Make a sharp turn, and let us see if they follow us.
Callias shook his head. "No, I don't want to lose the rest of our speed. We're going too slowly as it is. If they are chasing us, we will soon find out."
Nehurabed interjected. Are they Phoenicians?
"Yes."
Ordinary merchants, for sure.
Callias shrugged. "Not going on sail and all like this."
As he said this, he looked sharply in the face of Nehurabed, but the old man did not flinch. He asked, Where do the Carthaginian Coast Guard boats come from?
They keep boats at both ends of the bay. If they see something suspicious, or if they want to pursue, they can send those boats.
But they couldn't have seen us.
We saw the land, yes. So they could have seen us too.
So, do they send a ship after every boat?
No, but if they saw us in the early morning, it would have meant that we left Carthage at night, and that is suspicious.
All right, but it's still too little of a reason to send a large ship like this out of curiosity.
What if they received an order from Carthage to be on their guard?
Callias looked intently at Nehurabed, but was disappointed again. The old man's wrinkles remained perfectly still. Nehurabed smiled slightly. So, Greek, do you think this is a pursuit sent after me?
I don't think anything, my lord, but you would know better.
Callias observed his passenger closely. Nehurabed shook his head. It can't be, he said. How could the city of Carthage have notified the guards at the Cape so quickly?
Well, horsemen can travel from the city to the trading post in a few hours.
Then the pursuit would have begun only now.
They go fast, those fellows on the boat.
Yes, but to be here now, they would have had to leave port at least 5 hours ago.
Well, yes, I don't know exactly how long it takes for a horse to travel from the city to the end of the bay. But people also say that the Phoenicians can send messages to each other remotely.
Nehurabed looked up at him sharply, a little curious this time.
Yes, my lord. People say they can signal with lights. They can send a message from one post to another as needed.
I saw fires at night, far behind us, to the south.
Why didn't you tell me?
The light was very distant, and the day was already breaking, and I didn't think it was important. They fell silent. Callias shifted uneasily. Nehurabed walked away, sat still, his eyes narrowed into slits. And everything was as before. The boat ploughed on lazily, barely swaying on the serene waves. The water splashed and gurgled against their sides. The sail flapped lightly, then hung down impotent, then flapped a little again. The heat continued to rise. The sun had passed the zenith and was starting to lean towards the west. The strange boat was getting closer and closer.
They'll be upon us in an hour,
the helmsman said softly.
They will catch up with us before night-time. Gods!
Callias paled a little and began to wring his hands. Maybe they are ordinary merchants. Maybe they are ordinary merchants, he repeated, biting his lips. Melocles walked over to him. He was pale, his eyelids trembled for a moment, and he seemed about to break out in tears like a child, but he controlled himself. Then his face became hard, calm. "Do you have a sword?" he asked. Callias looked at him in surprise.
"Weapons are useless here," he replied slowly. "That boat has 20, maybe 30 rowers, maybe 10 crew. There are 5 of us."
Melocles frowned and lowered his head. His eyes darkened in anger. "I have sworn to almighty gods," he said in a muffled voice, "that I would not allow myself to be taken again. Never again. I want to die with a sword in my hand. I pray to all gods there in Carthage. All gods. Gods, listen to me. Give me a sword, good sir." There was a moment of silence. Callias examined the boy carefully. He shook his head.
"It's good that I didn't leave him there to die," he thought, but he didn't answer right away. In truth, he wasn't even sure if these people were Carthaginians or pirates. That they were going in the same direction, well, that obviously didn't mean a thing. He recalled many such events from his own past, and until now, all those worries had turned out to have been unnecessary. "They might be some peaceful sailors," he said.
"What if they are not?"
"Then we think what to do. By all gods, no one ever accused Callias of cowardice. But you can only fight when you can win, or at least save your skin."
"I will not be taken alive again. I'd rather die."
"Don't be too hasty. We still have time. And if push comes to shove, well, the wise god Hermes created money so that we can redeem ourselves, just in case. I didn't regret drachmas for you once, yes? You think I'll try to save money this time?"
The boy fell silent and only scowled at Callias, but it was easy to tell that he had not changed his mind. The older Greek stared at the strange ship, still distant but growing in his eyes. It was long, like a viper, low and narrow. It had 2 low masts with wide squares of sails. The boat was going mainly by the strength of the rowers. There were at least 20 of them.
"You can already see their oars,"
Callias shouted, stamping his foot and flushing with anger.
"A curse on this wretched boat of mine, and on this filthy weather, and on all of this. Damn this trip. Oh, gods, look!"
The wind came to a complete stop. Their sails sagged like an empty sack.
"For Hermes! They are already upon us. If only we had a little wind. Then we could wait for the night and slip away in the dark. If only we had a little wind. Blow, you damn thing! Blow!"
Indeed, the sea had clearly darkened. The night was still many hours away, but the sun had gone behind a wall of yellow-grey haze that had risen over the western horizon. The light of day shone through this smoke, a dirty yellowish glow, strange and mysterious.
"A storm is upon us too," said the helmsman.
"Let it come quickly," Melocles almost shouted.
"It's coming," Callias repeated. "But will it come in time?"
He glanced again at the strange boat and at the overcast horizon. The sky grew rapidly darker. A sudden wind rose, giving their boat speed.
"Oh, Poseidon!"
Callias cried, raising his hands towards heaven.
"Oh, thou all-powerful lord of the seas! Oh, brother of the highest! Save us, your children! Is it possible that you would allow us to be taken back to Carthage, to be despoiled by the hideous Phoenicians who mock you? Have they ever offered you a single heifer? Not one, I am sure. Oh, Poseidon, consider this."
A distant thunder answered him. This made a suitable impression, but the thunder was very far away. Callias shook his head.
"It's all for nothing," he said. "The storm will be here in an hour, and they'll be here in half an hour, or sooner."
Indeed, the strange ship was now close enough for them to make out individual faces of armed men on its deck. Her sails hung helplessly, but the evil tentacles of her oars moved rhythmically, driving her on. She looked like an evil beetle rushing towards them on the water.
"Rogues, robbers, bandits," Callias shouted. "Look how they rush!"
He began to tear at his beard again. Then he knelt down and pulled 2 old rusty swords from the bottom of the boat. Their pursuers were now no farther than a few thousand steps.
"We are done for," he moaned. "We are lost. Oh, Zeus!"
"No, we are saved," answered the helmsman suddenly, leaning into the rudder. Everyone looked at him in amazement. The boat turned around and came to a full stop.
"What are you doing, fool?"
Callias roared. The helmsman did not answer, only pointed to the north, and then began to untie hurriedly the straps of the sail. The sea to the north of them, still calm and smooth, suddenly became covered with a multitude of small white wrinkles approaching them quickly. 1 minute more, and a great gust of wind blasted the sail. The mast creaked with a violent heave, and the boat, like a horse smacked by a whip, jumped forward. But the strange ship, not prepared for the unexpected gust of wind, suddenly tilted to one side and swung around, coming to a full stop. Screams and shouts from the ship came to the ears of the Greeks through the roar of the gathering wind. But only for a moment, because another powerful gust of wind suddenly put a lot of sea between them. And now all pursuit would be futile. The wind increased again. The sky turned even darker. Rain broke. A veil of rain covered the horizon. Grey, dirty clouds rushed forward in front of a navy-blue curtain of the storm. Waves rose suddenly, became huge mountains, and began to toss the little boat. Everything, the whole world, suddenly started into a mad, unstoppable dash. The mast creaked under the pressure of the wind, the prow began to hammer the waves, and the waves began to break over the sides. Callias and Melocles dropped the sail halfway and loosened its ropes. Their boat ran forward like a racing hound. Then a torrential downpour hit them, and the whole world disappeared behind the wall of rain. Now they could only see the waves running right in front of them, blown by the wind, roaring, heaving, splashing, foaming, crashing. Suddenly it was totally dark, and a flash of lightning tore the sky. 1, 2, 3 thunderbolts. A terrible northwestern storm was upon them. The rain and the wind turned icy cold, and the sailors' hands holding onto the boat became numb. The helmsman leaned into the rudder with all his strength. Melocles and the third member of the crew, a Libyan boy, furiously baled water, now ankle-deep, and splashing again and again over the sides as the boat rocked and pitched. They clung to the boards and ropes in the dark to not fall overboard. To fall overboard now into the black, boiling, raging sea would have meant certain death. But Melocles knew this storm, the crazy dance of the deck. He gritted his teeth, fell, scrambled up, fell again, was up again and again and again, but did not stop bailing. Whoosh! A new wave washed overboard. Whoosh! The boat was full again. They bailed and bailed. The water would not stop coming, but they would not stop bailing. There was a wild exhilaration in the struggle with the terrible element. "O sea, O wind, we will not give up." The old man tried to help, but stumbled almost immediately, fell, and nearly tumbled overboard into the darkness. Melocles gave him a rope to tie himself to the bench at the bow of the ship, and the old man gave up on further attempts to cooperate. Hours passed. The storm kept on raging. Callias took over the rudder from the exhausted helmsman, and handed the care of the sail to Melocles. At first he watched anxiously to see if the boy could handle it, but after a while he relaxed. Despite his young age, Melicles was an experienced sailor. His hand was sure, his arm strong, his eye watchful. "My son will grow up like this," thought Callias. Around midnight, the storm stopped at last, and the wind eased. Callias corrected their course for Sicily, and watched Melicles reset the sail. "Definitely worth the 60 drachmas," he muttered to himself. The danger was over. When the day broke, there was no trace of the strange ship, no sailing ship of any kind anywhere in sight. Nothing around but the sea, still restless, heaving, here and there scarred by a foaming crest, but no longer dangerous, and gradually growing calmer. A strong, even westerly wind now carried them straight to their destination, north, towards the shores of Sicily. "The first thing we do when we arrive in Syracuse will be to offer a white heifer to Poseidon. He saved us today," said Callias. "He answered my prayer. He sent the storm to save us from pirates." He fell silent and thought for a moment, after which, because he regretted the cost of the heifer, he turned to the old man. "You too, sir, should contribute to the purchase of this heifer. You too were saved by the mighty brother of Zeus." But Nehirabed shook his head. "I am a worshipper of only one God, great and good," he replied slowly, "who defends the noble and the brave, and who abhors sacrifices." "What is this God called, my lord?" Melicles asked. "Men call him Ahura Mazda. It means the Just One," replied the old man.